13 doors. A child vanished. A secret no one dares to reveal. Welcome back to Whisper Horror Channel, the home of stories that will keep you glued to your screen. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment to give us more motivation to keep telling you the most haunting mysteries. Today, the series Gabriel, the Debt Bearer continues with a bizarre disappearance inside the Winchester mansion. Will Gabriel find Annelise in this labyrinth of fear? Let's explore this story. The dry bell signaling the end of the last class echoed through the tiled corridors of Northgate High School. But instead of the noisy, excited clamor of a crowd about to be set free, the atmosphere inside the school's large auditorium was thick with expectant silence. A stillness almost sacred. All 11th grade students, the junior class, sat perfectly still in the worn red upholstered seats. All eyes were fixed on the stage, where a man stood behind a wooden podium. It was Mr. Arthur Davidson, head of extracurricular activities. He was small in stature, with brown hair graying at the temples, and thick-rimmed glasses that made his eyes appear larger than usual. But no one dared to underestimate Mr. Davidson. His voice, though not loud, carried a strange weight, capable of silencing the most boisterous conversations with just one word. Order. Mr. Davidson began, and the already silent space seemed to grow even quieter. I know you're all eager for tomorrow's field trip, and I understand why. Whitgrave Manor isn't an ordinary museum. It's not just a historical monument. It's a lesson in psychology, in obsession, and in the price of atonement. He paused for a moment, scanning the auditorium, making sure he had everyone's attention. Most of you have read about it. Mrs. Eleanor Whitgrave, the sole heiress to the Whitgrave arms weapon manufacturing empire, used her vast fortune to build this mansion ceaselessly for nearly 4 decades. Popular legend has it that she did so on the advice of a psychic who told her she had to keep building to outrun and appease the countless souls who perished by the weapons her family created. As long as the sound of hammers echoed, her life would be preserved. Mr. Davidson stepped out from behind the podium, his hands clasped behind his back. The stage lights cast a long, distorted shadow of him on the wooden floor. But that's the story printed on the tickets, he continued, his voice dropping an octave. There's another version, one the tour guides will never tell. They say the house wasn't built to escape spirits. It was built to imprison them. Every dead-end corridor, every door opening to a wall, every staircase leading to the ceiling. They weren't products of madness. They were the bars of an architectural prison. Mrs. Eleanor created a labyrinth of wood and nails. An eternal trap not just for ghosts, but for anyone careless enough. Anyone who dared to defy its rules. He stopped in the middle of the stage, looking directly at the students. They say, if you get separated from your group and wander alone long enough inside, the house will start to recognize you. It will test you. The corridors will stretch impossibly long. The doors you just walked through will vanish, and you'll find yourself walking in a loop, passing the same room over and over again, while the footsteps of your tour group grow more distant, until all that's left is silence. You'll walk on and on, until you find, not the way out, but despair. A few nervous gulps echoed in the auditorium. The excitement of a field trip had gradually been replaced by a genuine sense of unease. You think I'm exaggerating? Mr. Davidson asked, and a faint, joyless smile flickered across his lips. Ask about the German tourist in 1998. A middle-aged man, perfectly healthy. He only left his group for a few minutes to find a restroom. When security found him in an empty ballroom, he had collapsed on the floor, dead. The official report said it was a heart attack. But one of the security guards who later retired recounted that the man's face was frozen in terror, his eyes wide open, staring at an empty corner of the ceiling, as if death hadn't come from within his body, but from what he had seen there. The air in the auditorium was now chilling. "I'm telling you these things not to ruin your trip." Mr. Davidson's voice became sharp, emphasizing each word. "I'm telling you this so you engrave the supreme rule of tomorrow in your minds. Never, ever, get separated from your group. I don't care if you see something interesting, or hear someone calling your name from another corridor. Always stay within sight of at least one teacher and one friend. Is that clear?" "Clear." A synchronized shout rang out, but it was weak and lacked its usual confidence. Mr. Davidson nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Now, you may be dismissed." As the students began to stir, gathering their belongings and dispersing through the exits, Mr. Davidson added one last sentence, his voice so low it was almost a murmur to himself. "Of course, there's another part to the legend, that there are passages in that house that don't follow ordinary rules. Secret corridors. They only reveal themselves to a select few. Those who share blood with the one who created the labyrinth." The words faded into the commotion of the dispersing crowd, unnoticed by anyone. After the auditorium was completely empty, with only the silent rows of seats remaining, another man emerged from the wings. It was Mr. Mark Gable, the school's supervisor. Mr. Gable was much larger than Mr. Davidson, with broad shoulders and the firm handshake of a former athlete, but his face now bore a look of deep worry. "Arthur," Mr. Gable began, his voice deep and contemplative, "do you think you went a bit too far? Scaring the kids half to death before a trip that's supposed to be fun?" Mr. Davidson turned, took off his glasses, and slowly wiped the lenses with a small cloth. Without his glasses, his eyes looked tired and sunken. "I'd rather they be scared half to death here, Mark," he replied, "than really dead there. You know that place. It's not Disneyland." "I know." Mr. Gable sighed, walking to the edge of the stage and looking down at the empty seats. "But sometimes I wonder why the school board approved a trip like this. There are dozens of safer art museums, historical sites. Why Whitgrave Manor, a place with a higher rate of unusual accidents than any other attraction in California? Because it's cheap, Mark. And it's impressive," Mr. Davidson said, his voice a little bitter as he put his glasses back on. "It gives our school the label of bold and innovative in education. A few good headlines in the district newsletter are enough for them to overlook the risks. The responsibility falls entirely on us." Mr. Gable was silent for a moment, his face thoughtful. "I've reviewed the list of participating students. There are almost 100 of them. We only have 6 teachers accompanying them. You know how restless kids this age are. If just one of them wants to prove they're brave by sneaking off alone, things could get very bad, very quickly. That's why I had to tell the story about the German man," Mr. Davidson said. "I needed that fear to stick in their heads. Fear is a more effective disciplinary tool than any of our threats. I just hope it's enough." The two men stood in the silence of the empty auditorium. Outside, the sun was setting, and long shadows began to fall through the high windows. "May tomorrow just be a boring trip," Mr. Gable finally spoke, but his voice held no hope. Mr. Davidson didn't reply. He just looked out the window, towards the darkening horizon, as if he could see the silhouette of Whitgrave Manor in the distance. A chaotic and menacing structure, silently waiting. waiting for the visit of 100 young and curious souls. And deep down, he had a very bad feeling about this trip. A chilling feeling that his warning, no matter how terrifying, would not be enough. Because the labyrinth always finds a way to its prey. The morning sky that day was a sickly grey, heavy like a soaking wet woolen blanket. Clouds swirled from the Pacific, promising a sunless day. It was a perfect backdrop, a natural irony for the trip to Whitgrave Manor. Inside the two bright yellow school buses, the dreariness of the weather seemed unable to penetrate. The air was filled with the chaotic and vibrant energy characteristic of youth. Laughter. The thumping of music from dozens of headphones. The rustling of snack bags passed around created a cacophonous symphony of carelessness. For nearly 100 Northgate 11th grade students, this was simply a day off from school. An adventure escaping the boring four walls of the classroom. Mr. Davidson's stern warning yesterday, though it had sown temporary fear in their hearts, was now pushed aside, becoming a spooky story for them to tease and challenge each other with. Hey, Mike, be careful not to go alone, or old Mrs. Whitgrave will pull you into the wall. A big boy named Jason shouted from the back seat, intentionally speaking loudly. Shut up, Jason. She'll haunt you first for your breath. That's worse than a dead body. Mike, a skinny but quick-witted boy, retorted. A whole section of the bus burst into laughter. Stories of ghosts, of missing tourists, were no longer warnings. They had become catalysts for youthful recklessness. A thrilling spice for the trip. Sitting in the front seat, right behind the driver, Mr. Mark Gable sighed, rubbing his aching forehead. He hadn't slept well last night. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in probability. And the probability of one of these nearly 100 restless kids doing something foolish in a 160-room building designed like a trap was almost certain. He glanced at the rear-view mirror, trying to do a visual head count. Every face seemed to be there, noisy and alive. He didn't notice a girl sitting in the middle seat, by the window. A girl who wasn't participating in the laughter, wasn't wearing headphones, wasn't looking at her phone. It was Annelise Whitgrave. She quietly looked out the window, watching the California highways and small towns flash by. But she wasn't really seeing them. In her mind, Mr. Davidson's last words echoed, those who share blood with the one who created the labyrinth. Her family always insisted that her last name, Whitgrave, was just a coincidence. But Annelise always felt there was something more to it. Sometimes, in her dreams, she saw herself walking through endless corridors, her fingers tracing spiderweb patterned wallpaper. She had never been to Whitgrave Manor, but in a deep corner of her soul, she felt like she was coming home. After nearly 2 hours, the buses turned onto a small road, flanked by tall, silent eucalyptus trees. And then, it appeared. Whitgrave Manor was unlike any architecture they had ever seen. It was a chaos of wood and glass, an architect's nightmare. Pointed towers sprouted in illogical places. Roofs overlapped like the scales of a prehistoric beast. Hundreds of windows of all shapes and sizes stared out like soulless eyes. The entire structure exuded an intentional madness, a profound sense of unease. The noise on the bus completely died down. The laughter ceased. Even Jason and Mike were silent, their faces pressed against the windows. The morbid grandeur of the house had an immediate effect, dousing their excitement with a cold splash. It stood there, under the grey sky, silent and menacing. They were greeted by a tour guide named Linda. She was a young woman with a radiant smile and a high ponytail, but her smile didn't seem to reach her eyes. There was an inherent weariness in her gaze, as if she had told this story too many times and faced the negative energy of this place every day. "Welcome, teachers and students, to the mysterious Whitgrave Manor," Linda said, her voice artificially cheerful. "Please always stay with your group and your guide. This house is very large, it's easy to get lost if you go alone." The heavy oak main door opened, and they stepped inside. The air inside immediately changed. It was thicker, colder, and carried an indescribable scent: old wood, centuries of dust, polishing wax, and a faint, sweet but withered smell of dried daisies. Linda began her presentation, her voice monotonous like a machine. She led them through the first few rooms, and the chilling architectural details began to emerge, testament to the madness of its creator. "To your right is a staircase," Linda said, pointing to a narrow, winding staircase. "It has 7 turns and 44 steps, but it's less than 3 meters high." Mrs. Eleanor suffered from severe arthritis, so she had these very low steps built to move between floors. They continued into a long corridor. "As you can see," Linda continued, "the door at the end of this corridor. Try opening it." Jason, wanting to show off, eagerly stepped forward and opened the door. He froze. Beyond it was not another room, but a solid brick wall. Nervous giggles rippled through the group. Mrs. Eleanor believed that spirits could only travel in straight lines. Linda explained mechanically. Doors leading to nowhere like this were thought to be traps to stop them. They went up to the 2nd floor. The air seemed even colder. Linda stopped in front of a large window overlooking the garden. "And this is one of the most famous examples," she said. "This door, if you were to step through it, would be a nearly 5-meter free fall directly into the garden below. No one knows what it was built for. Perhaps a balcony was once there and destroyed in the 1906 earthquake. But Mrs. Eleanor never had it rebuilt." The initial excitement of the students had completely vanished, replaced by a wary silence. They huddled closer together. Mr. Davidson's warnings were no longer a joke. They were now physically present before them. In wood, in glass, in dark corridors and doors that led nowhere. Annelise walked at the back of Mr. Gabriel's group. She wasn't really listening to what Linda was saying. She was listening to the house. To her, this silence wasn't empty at all. It was full of echoes. She could hear the sound of hammers from afar, and the whispers of a woman giving instructions to the workmen. She could feel the pain, the fear, and an iron will that had permeated every plank of wood. This place wasn't unfamiliar. It was terrifyingly familiar. As they walked through a narrow corridor, the faint light from the high windows created alternating streaks of light and shadow on the floor, resembling piano keys. It was here, as the group was focused on a portrait of Mrs. Eleanor, that Annelise felt it. An unusually cold gust of wind, blowing only on her. It came from a dark corner of the corridor, a place where light couldn't reach. She squinted. Behind a peeling, spiderweb pattern wallpaper, a section of dark wooden wall was revealed. And on that wood was a crack. A dark, vertical line, almost invisible if you didn't look closely. It wasn't just a crack. Annelise had a feeling it was a door that was never meant to be opened. While the other students began to move with Linda to the next room, Annelise froze. She couldn't take her eyes off that crack. An intense curiosity, an irresistible pull, rose within her. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was more like a reflex, an action pre-programmed in her veins. As if a part of her had known about the existence of this door for a very long time. She glanced at her group. They had entered a larger room, and Linda had begun a new story. No one looked back. No one noticed she had stopped. Just a little, she told herself. Her heart pounded. She would just see what was behind it, then turn back immediately. She slowly separated from the light of the main corridor, stepping into the shadows. She reached out her trembling fingers towards the crack. There was no doorknob. She pressed lightly on the edge of the wood. It didn't creak. It moved silently, smoothly, as if it had been oiled and was waiting for her. A dark slit appeared. A blast of even colder air, carrying the scent of millennia of dust, wafted from within. Annelise took a deep breath and squeezed herself through the gap. Meanwhile, in the next room, Linda had led the group in front of an intricately carved ebony door. Her usual weary expression seemed to have vanished, replaced by dramatic excitement. She had reached her favorite part of the presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice dropping to a mysterious whisper, "beyond this door is one of the greatest and most terrifying mysteries of Whitgrave Manor. We call it the Room with No End." All the students, and even the teachers, held their breath, listening. Even Mr. Gabriel was captivated. "Legend has it," Linda continued, "that this is the room Mrs. Eleanor used to confront the most stubborn spirits. This room was designed as a psychological trap. When a person steps inside, the door automatically closes. Inside, it's completely empty. 4 identical walls. No windows. No furniture. No landmarks whatsoever. But the most terrifying thing is that this room has the ability to change its size." She paused, letting the silence and everyone's imagination do the rest. Those who were trapped inside recounted that, at first, it was just a small room. But the longer they stayed, the more they felt the walls slowly receding, making the room endlessly larger. They would walk on and on in the darkness, trying to find a wall to lean on. But they never reached it. They were trapped in an empty, infinite space until their sanity completely collapsed. Linda spoke ecstatically, her eyes gleaming. She didn't realize, and no one else captivated by her story realized, that in the corridor outside, a student had actually stepped into a trap even more terrifying than the story she was telling. Everyone's attention, from the most curious students to the most responsible teachers, had been completely absorbed by the story of the Room with No End. It was a perfect distraction. As Annelise fully squeezed herself into the darkness, the wooden door behind her, which had no handle from the inside, automatically slid shut. Thud. The sound wasn't loud, just a dry, decisive thud of wood hitting wood. But for Annelise, it resonated like thunder in the absolute silence. She startled and turned around. Too late. The faint streak of light from the main corridor had vanished. She was engulfed in a thick darkness. A heavy silence so profound that she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. She reached back, fumbling on the cold wooden surface. No crack. No edge. Nothing to hold on to. The wall was now flat, as if the door had never existed. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. The silence swallowed her words. There was no echo. "Is anyone there?" she called louder, panic beginning to rise in her chest. Still only silence replied. She had realized her terrible mistake. She hadn't just gotten lost. She had stepped into a place off the map. A place not meant for the living. She had been swallowed by the labyrinth. And that, Linda concluded the story of the Room with No End with a dramatic smile, is why we never open this door to visitors. Some mysteries are best left undisturbed. Her words hung in the heavy air of the manor. The students, captivated by the story, collectively exhaled as if released from a spell. Whispers and murmurs rose, mixed with fear and admiration. "That's insane. A girl named Emily whispered to her friend. "Do you think it's true? They probably just made it up to make it spookier," her friend replied, though her voice wasn't very confident. In the midst of this, Emily turned, intending to find another friend in the group to share her feelings. She looked for Annelise. Annelise was the quietest in the group. But Emily knew her friend loved mysterious stories like this. She wanted to see Annelise's reaction. But Annelise wasn't there. Emily scanned the group of students who were beginning to move with Linda to the next room. She didn't see the familiar light brown hair. She frowned, a little annoyed. Annelise must have gone ahead. She strained to look over the shoulders of the others. Still no sign. A small, irrational sense of unease began to sprout in Emily's heart. She turned to Mr. Gabriel, who was trying to usher the students in the right direction. "Mr. Gabriel," she said, her voice a little hesitant. "What is it, Emily?" Mr. Gabriel asked, his eyes still counting heads in the group. He already had a bad feeling. I don't see Annelise," Emily said. "Is she with Mr. Davidson's group?" The name Annelise made Mr. Gabriel's heart skip a beat. He had just counted and realized he was missing someone. Emily's words confirmed his worst fears. "Everyone." Mr. Gabriel's voice suddenly became loud and sharp, cutting through the noise. "Everyone stand still." The group froze, surprised by the sudden change in his demeanor. Panic, though well hidden, was evident in his eyes. "When was the last time anyone saw Annelise Whitgrave?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Silence fell. The students looked at each other, rummaging through their memories. Earlier, in the corridor, a boy named Tom, who had stumbled, spoke up. "When I dropped my stuff, I think I saw her at the back of the group, right near the corner." Mr. Gabriel's face turned pale. He immediately pulled out his walkie-talkie, his hand trembling slightly. "Arthur, do you read me?" Mr. Davidson's voice crackled back, loud and clear. "Mark, what's wrong?" "I've lost a student," Mr. Gabriel said, each word like a knife. "It's Annelise Whitgrave. Check your group immediately. Ask if anyone has seen her." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. Then Mr. Davidson's voice came through. "Taut as a string. Understood. All teachers, do a head count immediately. Halt the entire tour." The alarm had been raised. The atmosphere of a fun field trip vanished in an instant, giving way to a spreading sense of confusion and fear. Calls of Annelise began to echo, faint and lost in this colossal labyrinth, swallowed by the wooden walls before they could travel far. Less than 20 minutes later, Whitgrave Manor had transformed into a completely different place. Its facade as a tourist attraction was stripped away, revealing the face of a potential crime scene. Two San Jose Police Department patrol cars were parked directly in front of the main gate, their lights flashing silently, impassively under the gray sky. The students had been gathered in the main hall, their faces showing clear signs of confusion and fear. The ghost stories they had once teased each other with had now become a terrifying reality. Lieutenant Al-Jamil, a middle-aged man of Middle Eastern descent with a stern face and tired eyes, was speaking with Mr. Davidson and Mr. Gabriel, the manor's head of security. A stout man named Hank also stood there, his face flushed with tension. "We've had our people sweep the entire tour route," Hank said, his voice a little defensive. "Checked every restroom, every exit. The kid couldn't have just walked out without anyone seeing. All the doors have alarms." "When and where was she last seen?" Lieutenant Al-Jamil asked, ignoring Hank's words and looking directly at Mr. Gabriel. "About 25 minutes ago," Mr. Gabriel replied, his voice hoarse. In the second floor corridor. West wing. Just a moment of distraction. Another student fell. And she vanished. Al-Jamil finished the sentence. Not a scream. Not a trace. He turned to Hank. What about your camera system? Hank sighed. That's the problem. We have cameras at every entrance, the main hall, and key areas. But we don't install cameras in the tour corridors to maintain the manor's atmosphere. Management policy. Wonderful. Al-Jamil muttered sarcastically. So show me everything you have. The footage from when the bus arrived. They moved to the small, cramped security room in the basement. Hank sat at the control desk, beginning to rewind the footage on dozens of monitors. They saw the buses arrive. The noisy students disembark. They saw Annelise, a small, quiet figure, enter the main hall with her friends. Her image was very clear. But that was the last time they saw her. They rewound and replayed the footage from every possible angle. The main hall, the grand staircases, the gift shop entrance, the garden exit. Annelise Whitgrave had entered Whitgrave Manor, but she had never left. She also never reappeared on any internal camera after entering the unmonitored tour area. No way. Hank muttered, his face growing paler. It's like she just dissolved into thin air. Lieutenant Al-Jamil said nothing. He just stared at Annelise's last image on the screen. A girl stepping through the manor's threshold. A chilling professional feeling ran down his spine. He had handled many missing child cases, but none like this. Something was wrong with this place. The heavy atmosphere, the dark corridors, and now this illogical footage. Seal off the entire manor. He ordered a young officer. No one in or out. Begin a detailed search. Ransack every room, every closet, every hidden corner. I want to know everything about this place. The official search began. But it proceeded with increasing futility. Police officers and security personnel fanned out through the corridors. But the labyrinth seemed to be playing tricks on them. Systematic search plans quickly became chaotic as teams reported losing their bearings. That the corridors they had just walked through seemed to have changed. The outside world, with its logic and rules, had intervened. But Whitgrave Manor didn't seem to care. In the security room, the frustration grew thicker. Hank had called an IT expert to re-examine the entire camera system, hoping there was some technical error, a blind spot they had overlooked. No errors. The expert said after an hour of inspection, the system is working perfectly. No blind spots on the main routes. No footage deleted or edited. He pointed to a monitor. Here. Look. This is the camera in the corridor leading out of the west wing. The group of students passed through here at 11:42 a.m. 14 students and 1 teacher. No Annelise. He switched to another monitor. This is the camera at the nearest staircase. No one passed through during that time. Camera at the garden exit. Nothing either. Camera at the basement entrance. Same. So where did she go? Hank roared, slamming his hand on the table. The expert shrugged. According to what the machines recorded, he said slowly, she entered the main hall. And then, she never left the unmonitored tour area. Technically, she's still in there. But the cameras at every exit from that area didn't capture her image. He paused, then added a sentence that made everyone in the room shiver. It's like she stepped into a door that doesn't exist on our system. Lieutenant Al-Jamil felt a headache coming on. All physical evidence, all logical data, pointed to the impossible. A girl couldn't just vanish. There had to be a rational explanation. A secret passage? A kidnapper hidden inside? But the more they searched, The more distant the rational explanations became. This house seemed to defy reality itself, while the search was reaching a dead end. Another terrible task had to be performed. Mr. Davidson and Lieutenant Al-Jamil sat in the manor director's office. An oddly luxurious room with antique furniture and damask-covered walls. On the desk was a student file, and on it was the Whitgrave's phone number. "Let me call," Mr. Davidson said, his voice full of weariness. "It's my responsibility." Al-Jamil nodded, pushing the phone towards the principal. Mr. Davidson dialed, his hand trembling slightly. After 3 rings, a woman's voice answered. "Hello? Hello? Mrs. Whitgrave?" Mr. Davidson tried to keep his voice steady. "This is Arthur Davidson, principal of Northgate High School." "Yes. Speaking. What is it, Mr. Davidson? Is Annelise all right?" The mother's voice held a hint of worry. Mr. Davidson closed his eyes. This was the hardest part. "Mom, I'm very sorry to report. There's been an incident during the field trip. We can't find Annelise." There was a deadly silence on the other end. Then Mrs. Whitgrave's voice came through, higher and sharper. "What do you mean? You can't find her? Is she lost?" "We're not sure, Mom. She got separated from the group. We're doing everything we can. The police are here and conducting a search." "Police?" The mother's voice broke into a choked scream. "Oh, my God. No. David. David. Come here." Mr. Davidson could hear sobbing, and a man's urgent questions on the other end. Then the father's voice, frantic and panicked. "What's wrong with my daughter? Where is she?" "Mr. Whitgrave," Mr. Davidson said, repeating the hollow words. "We are searching for your daughter. She is missing inside Whitgrave Manor." "Whitgrave Manor?" the father roared. "Why did you take the children to that cursed place?" "I'm coming there immediately." The call ended abruptly with a click. Mr. Davidson put the phone down, his face etched with pain and guilt. Their family's pain was a tangible weight, crushing the air in the room. Less than an hour later, the Whitgraves rushed into the main hall. They were the living embodiment of madness and despair. The mother, her eyes swollen from crying, tried to rush towards the tour area, screaming her daughter's name before being stopped by officers. The father, a man who looked tall and strong, was now shrunken, his face distorted with pain, incessantly questioning Lieutenant Al-Jamil. "How could this happen? What did you do? Where is my daughter?" It was a sight no one could bear. Their pain was too great, too raw. It made the mystery of the house seem more wicked and cruel than ever. Mr. Mark Gabriel sat in a corner of the security room, feeling utterly helpless. He had tried to participate in the search, but like everyone else, he just walked in circles in the labyrinth and felt the futility grow. Now, he just sat there, looking at the list of students on the field trip. A piece of paper that now felt as heavy as lead. He read the names over and over, as if doing so could make Annelise reappear. Jason Smith, Emily Chen, Mike Williams, Annelise Whitgrave, Annelise Whitgrave. Mr. Gabriel froze. That name, Whitgrave. He stood up, walked to a historical information board hung on the security room wall. The board had an old, faded portrait of a stern-eyed woman in a black Victorian dress. Below the portrait was a brass inscription. Eleanor Whitgrave, 1839 to 1922, the creator, the prisoner, the soul of the manor. Mr. Gabriel stared at the inscription. Then he looked back at the list in his hand. Whitgrave. Whitgrave. A coincidence? Perhaps. This was California. There could be many unrelated families with this last name. But in this context, in this insane manner, where a girl had just vanished without a trace, the word coincidence sounded hollow and foolish. He recalled Mr. Davidson's last words during yesterday's briefing. Words he had dismissed as a cheap ghost story. There are secret corridors. They only reveal themselves to a select few. Those who share blood with the one who created the labyrinth. A chill not caused by the temperature ran down Mr. Gabriel's spine. He turned to Mr. Davidson, who was standing in the corner of the room, trying to comfort Mrs. Whitgrave. "Arthur," Mr. Gabriel called, his voice hoarse. Mr. Davidson turned, his eyes weary. "Her last name," Mr. Gabriel said, holding up the list. "It's Whitgrave." Mr. Davidson's face lost all color. His eyes widened behind his thick glasses. Horrifying comprehension dawned on his face. A confirmation of the worst fear he had tried to suppress. It wasn't a kidnapping. It wasn't an accident. The house had chosen her. Or rather, it had called one of its own back. The darkness behind the secret door was not an emptiness. It was an entity. Thick, cold, and silent to the point where Annelise could hear her own heart beating wildly in her chest like a death drum. The initial panic flared up like a fire, consuming all rational thought. She pounded her hands on the flat wooden wall behind her, where the door had just closed. But only the solid silence of ancient wood replied. "Please," she whispered, her voice lost in fear. "Open the door. Please." Nothing happened. The labyrinth had swallowed her, and it had no intention of letting go. After moments of extreme panic, something strange happened. The coldness around her seemed less hostile. The darkness no longer felt threatening, but became expectant. A silence not of a tomb, but of a forgotten library. Gradually, a strange sense of familiarity, the feeling she had had since getting on the bus, began to return, stronger than ever. It was like an invisible warm blanket, enveloping her fear, as if guided by an unseen hand. She turned her back on the vanished door and stepped forward. She saw nothing, yet her steps were surprisingly confident, as if she had walked this path 1,000 times in a distant dream. She took 13 small steps, and her outstretched hand touched a cold, round surface, a doorknob. She turned it. The door opened silently, revealing a space that was not the noisy tour corridor she had just left. Annelise stepped in and froze. She was standing in a bedroom that seemed to have been forgotten by time for centuries. The air inside was heavy with the smell of dust, decaying wood, and a faint, sweet but withered scent of dried daisies. A thick layer of dust like snow covered every surface, blurring every contour. The only light was a weak, grey glow filtering through a single window, its pane opaque with dirt and cobwebs. The room wasn't large. In the center was a four-poster bed, its muslin canopy yellowed and torn like dead butterflies. A vanity with a tarnished mirror stood in the corner, and a small black marble fireplace, its hearth cold and empty. But what captured Annelise's attention the most were the walls. The wallpaper, though faded and peeling in many places, still clearly showed its main pattern, countless tiny white daisies on a pale green background. This was the daisy bedroom. Annelise knew it with certainty, though she had never heard anyone speak of it. She knew this was the first room Mrs. Eleanor Whitgrave had slept in when she first came to this land, when the manor was just a tiny farmhouse, before fear and remorse transformed it into a monstrous labyrinth. She knew it, not rationally, but by a kind of genetic memory, an echo from deep within her blood. Tourists had passed through the outer corridor thousands of times. Security guards had patrolled here every night. But no one had ever seen the door leading into this room. This room didn't exist for them. It only existed for her. Annelise's fear had now completely vanished, replaced by a sacred curiosity. She walked around the room, her small footsteps stirring centuries of dust. She ran her fingers over the dusty bedspread. She looked into the tarnished mirror, seeing only a blurred, ghostly image of herself looking back. There was a feeling that she wasn't alone in the room. But this wasn't the presence of a strange ghost. It was more like the presence of a memory, of a silent host observing. Her gaze fell to the underside of the bed. Beneath thick cobwebs and shadow, there was a rectangular object. Her heart beating faster. She knelt down, using her hand to brush aside the sticky cobwebs. It was a small cedar wood chest. Its wood darkened with age. The brass fittings were tarnished green, but still intact. There was no lock on the lid, just a simple latch. It seemed it wasn't made to hold valuables, but only to protect private things. With reverence, Annelise unlatched the clasp and slowly opened the chest. A scent of cedar wood, old paper, and dried flowers wafted into her face. Inside were no jewels or gold. It held only two things. Lying on a faded velvet lining was a small, leather-bound diary. The leather cover was dry and cracked at the corners, but still very sturdy. Beside the diary were a small silver hand mirror and a silver hair brooch. Annelise picked up the diary. It was heavier than she expected. She felt as if she were holding an entire lifetime. A century of pain and solitude. She sat down on the dusty floor, her back against the bed frame, and carefully opened the diary. The pages inside were yellowed, but the ink was still very clear. It was a slender, elegant cursive handwriting of a well-educated woman. But there was a tremor, a sense of urgency hidden behind each letter, as if the writer was trying to record her thoughts before they vanished or before her courage ran out. The first page was clearly dated October 18, 1884. Annelise began to read. Eleanor Whitgrave's voice seemed to echo in her mind. Not like a ghostly sound, but like a whispered confession from a grandmother she had never met. My first night in this place. I had this room decorated with daisies. The flower of innocence. What an irony. There is no innocence left in my soul. It has been washed away by blood. Extinguished by gunfire, gunfire that bears my name. Gunfire that brought me this wealth and this damnation. The Boston psychic told me I had to go west, to where the sun sets, and build a house. She said I had to build ceaselessly, to create a sanctuary for the souls who died by Whitgrave's guns. A sanctuary, or a prison? Sometimes I can no longer distinguish. She said as long as the sound of hammers echoed, I would live. But is this living? Living in constant fear. Hunted by the ghosts my own family created. Tonight, I heard them. For the first time. They are not in this room. They are outside. In the shadows of the orchards. Whispers. Groans. The cries of young soldiers dying on battlefields. The weeping of orphaned children. They do not call my name. They call the gun's name. Whitgrave. That sound is like a curse. I have locked every door and window. I sit here, writing these lines by candlelight, and wonder if these flimsy wooden walls are strong enough to keep them out. I feel like a small ship in an invisible storm. I cannot fight them. I can only build. I will build long corridors to tire them in pursuit. I will build doors that lead nowhere to deceive them. I will build staircases to the sky to get them lost. This house will be my fortress. It will be my labyrinth. And it will be my tomb. I am alone. Completely alone. But tonight, I have a strange feeling. A feeling that one day, long after I am gone, Someone else will sit in this room. Someone of my blood. A kindred spirit who can understand this fear and burden. If you are reading these lines, my unknown descendant, know that you are not alone. I was here before. And I am still here. Annelise looked up from the diary page. Tears streaming down her cheeks. She wasn't crying out of fear, but out of a deep empathy. A connection that transcended space and time. She was no longer a lost child. She was the chosen one. Mrs. Eleanor had known, somehow, that she would come. These words were written for her. After finishing the diary entry, Annelise carefully placed it aside and looked back into the chest. She picked up the small hand mirror. It was made of pure silver. Its back engraved with a single daisy. It was cold and surprisingly heavy in her palm. She turned it over. The mirror surface had a crack running across it, dividing the reflection into two imperfect pieces. She looked into the mirror, and saw her own face looking back. Also tear-stained. But there was something different. Her reflection seemed to be in a slightly different room, where the light had a warmer hue, and the shadows in the corners seemed to be moving. She quickly put the mirror down, her heart pounding. Next, she picked up the hair brooch. It was also made of silver, intricately crafted into the shape of a daisy sprig. The pin was still sharp. As she held it, a strange feeling coursed through her. Not a feeling of warmth or cold, but a sense of purpose, of power. It was like a key, but not to open a physical lock. She looked back at the diary. She had a feeling that the answer to what she had to do next lay within it. She flipped through the pages, skimming descriptions of the frantic construction, the nightly terrors, and Eleanor's increasing solitude. She turned to the last page. The last page wasn't a long entry. It only had a few lines, written in bolder, more decisive ink, as if written at a different time, after an important decision had been made. It wasn't a farewell. It was an instruction, a code. The excerpt was brief, but every word carried a terrifying weight. This labyrinth has its own rules. I learned them at great cost. I leave these rules to you, my bloodline. Listen carefully. My soul is still here, bound to every plank of wood, every nail. But it will never appear in the mirror. A silver mirror only reflects what belongs to your world, not mine. If you look in the mirror and see nothing but yourself, then I am still just a memory. But if you see me, not in the mirror, but with your own eyes, then that is when the danger is greatest. It means that the other spirits, the imprisoned ones, have also seen me, and they will hunt me. Do not speak to me. Do not try to touch me. Follow the Hall of Fire. Hall of Fire, Annelise whispered. What did that phrase mean? She reread the last sentence, trying to find a hidden meaning. Hall of Fire. Was it a burning corridor? Or a red-painted corridor? She picked up the silver mirror once more, took a deep breath, and looked into it. Still just her face, bisected by the crack. She breathed a sigh of relief. Mrs. Eleanor was still just a memory. She stood up, brushing dust from her clothes. She tucked the diary under her arm, carefully placing the broken mirror and the hair brooch into her jacket pocket. They were hers now. They were her legacy. She didn't know what to do next, but the fear had vanished. In its place was a chilling determination. She was no longer a victim of this house. She was its heir, and she would find the meaning of Hall of Fire. She stepped out of the daisy bedroom, back into the dark secret corridor. But this time, the darkness was no longer frightening. It felt like an old friend waiting. Her true journey had just begun. Night had fallen on Whitgrave Manor, but it brought no quiet. On the contrary, it amplified the chaos. The powerful headlights of the search and rescue team cut harsh, stark white streaks onto the house's insane architecture, transforming it into a ghostly stage. The crackle of walkie-talkies, the confused barks of search dogs, and Mrs. Whitgrave's inarticulate sobs created a symphony of failure. Mr. Mark Gable stood huddled outside the police perimeter, feeling a cold helplessness permeate his bones. He was a man of action, of logic, of tangible solutions. But here, all logic collapsed. Search teams had turned over every inch of ground, sweeping every room according to the blueprints. The result was still zero. Annelise Whitgrave had vanished as if she had never existed. And that surname, Whitgrave. It kept repeating in his head, not as a coincidence, but as a mockery. A mismatched piece in an already illogical puzzle. While Lieutenant Al-Jamil and others were chasing theories of a kidnapper or a secret passage, Mr. Gable felt the answer lay elsewhere. Somewhere deeper, older. An insane thought sparked in his mind. A thought that the pragmatic Mr. Gable of a few hours ago would have dismissed as nonsense. But now, in this despair, no thought was insane anymore. "Arthur," he said to Mr. Davidson, who stood beside him, looking a decade older, "I need to go back to school. Right now." "Back to school? For what?" Mr. Davidson asked, his voice weary. "I need to check something. In the archives," Mr. Gable replied, offering no further explanation. He didn't wait for permission. He pushed through the crowd, got in his car, and sped off into the night, leaving behind the flashing lights and the giant shadow of the manor. Northgate High School's archives were located in the basement, a rarely visited place. The air here was thick with the smell of old paper and dust. Under the flickering fluorescent lights, tall iron shelves were filled with file boxes, old yearbooks, and the forgotten history of thousands of students who had passed through this school. Mr. Gable wasn't looking for Annelise's file. He was looking for something else. He remembered that Northgate was an old school, and it had a collection of local historical documents donated by a history-loving principal decades ago. After nearly half an hour of searching, he found it, a row of cardboard boxes labeled Santa Clara County History, Genealogy and Documents. His hands were covered in dust as he pulled out a heavy box. Inside were jumbled documents, yellowed old newspaper clippings, and copies of birth and death certificates. He began searching for the name Whitgrave. He found a lot. The Whitgrave family, thanks to their arms empire, had once been a powerful force in this region. But he wasn't interested in their business achievements. He was looking for forgotten branches of the family tree, distant relatives. And then, he found it. A copy of a birth certificate from the 1970s. Father, John Whitgrave. Mother, Mary Gable. Mr. Gable's heart nearly stopped. Gable. That was his mother's maiden name. John Whitgrave was his mother's cousin. Someone he vaguely remembered from childhood summer vacations. A branch of the family they had long lost touch with. Annelise Whitgrave was his distant relative. And through his mother, she was a direct descendant, though a forgotten lineage, of Eleanor Whitgrave's family. Mr. Davidson's warning was no longer a legend. It was the truth. Those who share blood with the one who created the labyrinth. Guilt and responsibility crashed down on Mr. Gable like a tsunami. This was no longer just about a student. This was about family. That horrifying discovery was like a key, unlocking another door in Mr. Gable's mind. A long-buried memory. A story his grandfather, a man passionate about folklore and hidden histories, had once told him when he was a boy. He began to search frantically through the document boxes. This time, He wasn't looking for genealogy. He was looking for old books. Notes on local folklore. He found a small, worn cloth-bound book with no title. Inside were handwritten stories, legends, and strange occurrences not recorded in official histories. He turned page after page. And then he stopped at a chapter titled, Entities Bound to the Earth. The chapter described tragedies where souls did not move on. Not because they lingered, but because they were imprisoned by the land or structure where they died. They became a part of that place, a debt of history. And then he read the phrase, in these cases, conventional exorcism methods are useless. There is only one legend, a single hope whispered among those who know. They speak of a person, or an entity, called the debt-bearer. This person does not banish souls. This person listens to them, understands them, and somehow bears their debt, allowing them to find peace. The book listed a few locations where the debt-bearer was said to have appeared. The Bell family farm in Tennessee, where an entity known as the Bell Witch terrorized a family for years. The Gettysburg battlefield, where the pain of tens of thousands of soldiers had permeated every inch of ground. And a few lesser-known locations. Places where forgotten tragedies had occurred. This was it. This was the story his grandfather had told. A solution not of this world. For a problem not of this world. But how to find this person? The book gave no name, no address. It only said that the debt-bearer could not be summoned. They had to be implored. At the end of the chapter, there was a small pencil note, in a different handwriting. He has no home, but he has a gateway. Below it was an address. An address in suburban San Jose. Not too far from here. And next to the address was a list of strange items: rough sea salt, old iron ring, small mirror. The skepticism and rationality within Mr. Gabriel screamed that this was madness. This was the product of superstition and desperation. But the image of Annelise's mother's tear-stained face, and the guilt over the blood connection he had just discovered, extinguished all doubt. He had no other choice. Mr. Gabriel drove to the address listed in the book. It led him out of the city, to a small, unpaved road with no name. The road ended before a simple iron gate, with no house, no fence, just a gate standing alone amidst a field of overgrown weeds. It looked utterly illogical, a gate that led nowhere. He got out of the car. The air here was strangely still. No crickets, no wind, only heavy silence. He had stopped at a 24-hour convenience store on the way to buy the necessary items. Now, in the car's headlights, he felt foolish. A high school teacher, a man of science, preparing to perform an ancient folk ritual in the dead of night. But he still did it. First, the salt. He took a handful of coarse sea salt, the large, sharp grains rubbing against his palm, and sprinkled an open circle directly in front of the gate. From what he vaguely remembered from his grandfather's stories, an open circle symbolized an invitation, not a confinement. Next, the iron ring. He had found it in his old toolbox. A rusted iron ring. He hung it on one of the gate's iron bars. Iron, the metal of the earth, was believed to drain supernatural energy, and hanging it like this was a sign of respect, a declaration that he came here with no hostile intent. Finally, the mirror. A small vanity mirror belonging to his wife that he had hastily taken. He placed it on the ground, right in the center of the salt circle. Mirror face down. An act of humility. An acknowledgement that he didn't come here to see, but to be seen. That he wasn't seeking answers in his world, but was imploring an answer from another world. Having finished, Mr. Gabriel stood there, feeling the absurdity of his recent actions. Nothing happened. Only the silent iron gate and the darkness. He waited 5 minutes. Then 10 minutes. Despair began to give way to disappointment. What a farce, he muttered. He turned, intending to go back to his car and face the harsh reality. "You're looking in the wrong place, teacher." The voice came from behind him, deep and quiet. Without any surprise, Mr. Gabriel jumped, whirling around. Gabriel was standing there. He hadn't stepped out of the gate, nor had he walked from the road. He was simply there, as if he had grown out of the shadows themselves. He was tall, thin, dressed in a worn tweed coat. His salt and pepper hair was slightly disheveled in the night breeze that seemed to exist only around him. But what left Mr. Gabriel frozen was his eyes. They were neither old nor young. They were deep, and held an infinite weariness, an ancient sorrow like the earth itself. It was the gaze of someone who had seen too much, had borne too much. Who are you?" Mr. Gabriel stammered, though in his heart he already knew the answer. "I am the one you seek," Gabriel replied, his gaze sweeping over the salt circle and the upturned mirror. "An ancient ritual. It's been a long time since anyone remembered." Mr. Gabriel, now over his initial shock, rushed forward. "Please, sir, you must help us. A student of mine, a young girl, has vanished inside Whitgrave Manor. The police can't find anything. She's like she dissolved into thin air. But she shares the same last name as the one who built the house. She's of the bloodline." He blurted out a torrent of words, his voice full of despair, trying to explain an absurd situation to an extraordinary man. Gabriel just listened silently. He didn't interrupt, didn't show surprise. His face showed no emotion except that inherent weariness. When Mr. Gabriel had finished speaking, with only his gasping breaths remaining in the quiet night, Gabriel slowly spoke. His voice offered no comfort, no promise. It held only a cold truth. "I don't look for people," he said. "My job is not to find those who are lost." Mr. Gabriel's heart sank. His last hope seemed about to vanish. But then Gabriel continued, his deep eyes seeming to look through Mr. Gabriel, gazing into the haunted manor in the distance. "I only accompany forgotten souls. Sometimes their paths cross with the paths of the living. Whitgrave Manor has a very large debt, a debt that has never been paid, and it seems it has just taken another hostage." He turned to look directly at Mr. Gabriel, and for the first time, Mr. Gabriel saw something else in Gabriel's eyes. Beneath the weariness, a heavy determination. "I will go there. But understand this clearly. I am not going to save the girl. I am going to pay the debt for the house. Her fate is now tied to that debt." Without waiting for an answer, Gabriel turned and stepped into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. Mr. Gabriel stood there alone, trembling, not from cold, but from the debt-bearer's last words. He had found help, but he had also just realized that the problem was much larger and more terrifying than he could have imagined. The search for Annelise was over. The battle for her soul, and the soul of the manor itself, had just truly begun. No one truly knows what watches from behind the old windows of Whitgrave. Only that, when you walk alone beneath the flickering streetlights, you might not be the only one hearing footsteps. This story has only just begun, and in the next part, you'll see some eyes never stop watching. If you're ready to keep walking with us, leave a comment, and don't forget to follow the channel before night falls.